Why do we always get bones? One of the children asked. Nkechi laughed dismissively. Do you know how expensive food is these days? You should be grateful for what you have. When I was your age, I ate even less without bone or meat. Once upon a time, in a small quiet village, there lived a young girl named Nkechi. Nkechi was born into a family that struggled with poverty. But more than that, her parents were harsh, angry people who treated her with cold indifference. From a young age, Nkechi knew hunger and loneliness. She was often left alone, her cries for comfort or warmth ignored, and sometimes she went days without proper food. Her parents would yell at her over small mistakes, and as she grew older, she started to believe that she was unwanted, a burden to everyone around her. When Nkechi was of age, she was sent to a distant city to work as a maid for a wealthy family. Her parents had heard of the opportunity through a distant relative, and And to them, it was a way to get rid of themselves a child they saw as an extra weight. Nkechi arrived in the city with little understanding of what her new life would be like. And though she hoped it might be kinder than her past, the couple she worked for, Mr. and Mrs. Eason, had three children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Michelle. They had built a prosperous life through years of hard work and dedication to their careers. And they lived in a beautiful house in one of the most expensive neighborhoods. Their home was the envy of all who passed by. With its tall gates, manicured lawns, and luxurious decor, in that home, they raised their three beloved children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Michelle. The Esons took great pride in giving their children everything they could dream of. Shadrach, the eldest, was a studious and quiet boy, always lost in his books or tinkering with his gadgets. Meshach, on the other hand, was adventurous and loved sports, often spending hours in the backyard perfecting his soccer skills. Michelle, the youngest, was a cheerful girl who adored art and often filled the house with her painting and sketches. They each had their own large bedrooms filled with toys, gadgets, and all the comforts their parents could provide. From the outside, it seems like the perfect life. Mr. and Mrs. Eason were busy, wealthy couple who adored their children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Michelle, but with demanding careers, they could not always be home to care for their children. So they hired a maid named Nkechi, hoping she would provide a nurturing presence in their absence. Nkechi appeared polite and respectful when the Isons were around, and she assured them that she would take care of their children as if they were her own. At first, Nkechi tried her best to fulfill her duties. She helped with cleaning, cooked meals, and took care of the children. But over time, old wounds from her past began to surface, and resentment filled her heart. The children's happy faces, their easy laughter, and the love their parents showed them triggered something deep and painful within Nkechi. She began to treat them coldly, often scolding them sharply for small mistakes or being dismissive when they tried to talk to her. As the weeks went by, her resentment turned into quiet cruelty. She would ignore their needs, feed them poorly, or even raise her voice to frighten them. The children, confused by these shifts, often tried to please her, but their efforts only reminded her of how unloved she had felt. She felt an urge to make them feel a fraction of what she had experienced in her own life. Nkechi's cruel behavior didn't stop at ignoring them. She also threatened them. One day, when Michelle, the youngest, bravely told Nkechi she would tell her parents how she treated them, Nkechi's face twisted with anger. "If you tell your parents anything about me," she hissed, "I will make sure you regret it. I will flog you when they are gone, and no one will be able to stop me." The children's eyes filled with fear. They were terrified of Nkechi's threat and felt trapped. Shadrach, the eldest, tried to protect his younger siblings by telling them to just stay quiet and do what she said. He hoped that if they would avoid making Nkechi angry, things would eventually get better. Each day, they suffered in silence. When Michelle accidentally spilled her watercolor for painting, Nkechi grabbed a stick and raised it, threatening. "Do you see this?" she said, waving it in front of them. "Make one more mistake and you will see what happens." The children cowered, too frightened to speak, and from that day on, they moved quietly through the house, careful not to attract her attention. At night, when their parents came home, they wanted so badly to tell them what was happening, but Nkechi's threat lingered in their minds. They were too scared to speak up. Instead, they forced smiles, hoping their parents wouldn't notice the sadness in their eyes, as though Mr. and Mrs. Eason would ask if everything was fine. The children will only nod, afraid that any hint of truth would bring Nkechi's wrath down on them. Shadrach, the eldest, was quiet and reserved, and he didn't ask for much, but he missed the warmth his parents had hoped Nkechi would provide in their absence. Once, when he asked her to help with his school assignment, she brushed him off, saying she was too busy with important things. Left on his own, Shadrach struggled to understand the lesson, but felt too intimidated to ask her again. Meshach, a lively boy who loved to play outside, frequently asked Nkechi to take him to the park, just as his parents would. When they had time, Nkechi would only give him a quick shake of her head and say, "Go play by yourself in the backyard." He tried to entertain himself, but it wasn't the same, and he grew frustrated and restless with lack of attention. Michelle, the youngest and most sensitive of the three, felt the sting of Nkechi's indifference the most. One afternoon, she fell while running around the living room and scratched her knee. She went to Nkechi, tears in her eyes, hoping for comfort, but Nkechi barely looked up from her magazine. "Stop crying, Michelle. You're fine," she said dismissively, turning her attention back to the magazine. Feeling abandoned, Michelle tried to stop her tears, but her heart ached from the lack of comfort she so desperately needed. Each day was the same. Nkechi ignored their pleas for help, rarely prepared meals on time, and when she did, they were often simple and unappetizing. Deeply grateful, Mrs. Eason, not noticing the negative behavior in Nkechi, decided she wanted to show her appreciation in a meaningful way. The following week, she took Nkechi out shopping in the city, telling her she wanted to buy some new clothes for her. Nkechi was surprised and touched by the gesture. Feeling shy but grateful, they went from store to store, and Mrs. Eason encouraged Nkechi to pick out beautiful dresses, shoes, and accessories. Nkechi hesitated at first, not wanting to take advantage, but Mrs. Eason insisted, reminding her that she deserved it for all she did for the family. However, Mrs. Eason's kindness did not make Nkechi treat the children right. Once the parents left each morning, Nkechi's behavior changed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Michelle quickly discovered that Nkechi was nothing like the kind helper she appeared to be. She became cold and distant, ignoring their needs, and grew impatient whenever they asked for help or attention. One afternoon, when Michelle spilled her juice on the floor by accident, Nkechi's face twisted with anger. She scolded Michelle harshly, saying, "How careless you are. Clean this up yourself." Michelle, feeling frightened, hurried to obey, tears in her eyes. From that moment on, it became clear that Nkechi was not someone they could turn to for comfort or support. The situation grew worse over time. Nkechi would often leave the children alone for hours while she sat in her room or watched television. She prepared quick, bland meals that the children found hard to eat, and she never took the time to talk to them or show any kindness. Whenever they would ask for something or make a mistake, she would snap at them, making them feel guilty for even speaking up. One evening, Shadrach tried to tell Nkechi that they missed their parents and asked if she could spend more time with them. Nkechi narrowed her eyes and in a low menacing voice, she said, "If you tell your parents about anything I do, you'll regret it. I'll make sure to punish you when they are gone. Now go to bed and stop complaining." The children were terrified. They knew their parents wanted the best for them, but Nkeshi's threat made them feel trapped. From then on, whenever Mr. and Mrs. Eason asked the children if everything was going well or if they were happy with Nkechi, they were too afraid to tell the truth. They would nod, forcing smiles and say, "Yes, mommy, yes, daddy, Nkechi is nice to us." But inside they felt helpless. Each day became harder for them. Meshach, who loved to play outside, no longer felt the joy of running around. Shadrach, usually the bravest, became withdrawn and quiet, while little Michelle was constantly on edge, afraid of making mistakes. One day, when Mr. Eason returned home early from work, he noticed that Shadrach looked unusually sad. "Is something wrong, Shadrach?" he asked gently, hoping his son would open up. Shadrach hesitated, glancing nervously towards Nkechi, who was watching from a distance with a sharp look in her eyes. Remembering her trait, he shook his head and forced a smile. "No, Dad, everything's fine." Miss Eason looked at him curiously, but didn't press the issue, unaware of what was happening behind closed doors. One morning, after tidying up the entire sitting room, Nkechi turned to find Michelle happily taking out her toys to play. Michelle, the youngest, was full of energy and loved playing with her toys and dolls, often setting them up in the middle of the sitting room. She was excited and didn't notice Nkechi's frown as she scattered the toys across the floor. Suddenly, Nkechi's voice boomed across the sitting room. "Michelle, how many times have I told you not to mess up the sitting room? Are you even listening?" Startled, Michelle froze in fear. She looked up at Nkechi's angry face and tried to mumble an apology, but her words got stuck in her throat. She was so frightened that she felt her body go cold. She messed up her body, and before she could stop herself, she suddenly wet her clothes. Seeing this, Nkechi's face twisted in disgust. "Look at you. You made a mess of yourself too," she shouted, her voice laced with irritation. Instead of comforting the little girl or helping her clean up, Nkechi only scolded her more. "This is what happens when you don't listen." Michelle's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her head down, too scared to speak. Nkechi glared at her, and in a harsh voice she added, "You will stay in those clothes till evening. Maybe that will teach you a lesson." All day, Michelle sat in her damp clothes, feeling ashamed and uncomfortable. Shadrach and Meshach, her older brothers, noticed her discomfort and felt terrible for her, but they were too afraid of Nkechi to speak up. They didn't want to make things worse for Michelle, so they simply sat quietly beside her, trying to comfort her with their presence. Hours passed, and Michelle grew more miserable by the minute. Finally, just before her parents returned, Nkechi let Michelle change out of her wet clothes, but the damage was done. Michelle, felt humiliated and heartbroken. And even though her brothers tried to cheer her up, the memory of Nkeshi's anger and the way she's been treated lingered. Every evening, as dinner time approached, Shadrach, Meshach, and Mishael will wait eagerly at the dining table, their little tummy rumbling with hunger. They will watch Nkechi as she moved back and forth in the kitchen, preparing the meal, hoping that tonight there will be enough for everyone to enjoy. But Nkechi had her own plans. When the meal was ready, Nkechi will carry 4 plates, one overflowing with steam of hot rice, tender chunks of meat, and rich savory sauce, and the other 3 plates with a modest scoop of rice and bones. The children's eyes widened, but they stayed silent, their hearts sinking as they realized which plate would be for them. Nkechi would place the plate of mega portion in the front of the 3 children and keep the larger plate for herself. As she sat down, she would smile and say, "Enjoy, children, eat up," with hunger gnashing at their stomach. Shadrach, Meshach, and Mishael would pick at the rice and the dry bones, struggling to get any meat off it. "Why do we only get bones?" Nkechi Shadrach would sometimes dare to ask, his voice small and hesitant. Nkechi would just laugh dismissively. "Do you know how expensive food is these days? You should be grateful for what you have. When I was your age, we ate even less, without any meat or bone," she would say as she took a large bite of her food. The children watched as Nkechi enjoyed her meal, relishing every bite. They could smell the delicious aroma of the tender meat and the rich sauce she was serving, and their mouth watered. But no matter how many times they politely asked or hinted, Nkechi would never share. Another day, when Mr. Eason returned home from work early again, he noticed that Meshach was not himself. He was kind of sad. He asked if something was wrong, but Meshach said nothing was wrong. However, over time, both Mr. and Mrs. Eason began noticing changes in their children. They were quieter, less cheerful, and hesitant to talk about their days. Suspicious, Mrs. Eason decided to set up a hidden camera in the living room, hoping to understand what was going on in their absence. What they discovered was heartbreaking. The footage revealed Nkechi's true behavior, her coldness, her neglect, and even her threats when the children tried to ask for help. They watched as Nkechi scolded Michelle for small accidents, ignored Meshach's plea for playtime, and frightened Shadrach into silence. Mrs. Ison's heart broke as she saw her children's fearful faces, realizing the toll Nkechi's cruelty had taken on them. Confronting Nkechi immediately, Mr. and Mrs. Ison made it clear that she was no longer welcome in their home. They let her go that very day and reassured the children that they would never have to deal with such treatment again. From then on, the Isons became more attentive to their children's feelings, ensuring that they felt safe to speak openly. They installed camera everywhere in the house except in the mess room in order to monitor what was going on in their children's life when they are at work. They found a new caregiver, someone they carefully vetted, who truly loved and respected the children. Slowly, Shadrach, Meshach, and Mishael regained their trust. Laughter returned to the house, and the family grew closer than ever, grateful for the love and honesty that now filled their home. Thank you for watching. Please kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more stories. Bye.